Welcome, everyone. Welcome, young investigators, and our first webinar or sequence of events introducing you to the DM funding landscapes as well as best practices. We are really excited. We put a lot of thought into this, and we hope you will find it helpful. And we, of course, hope it will help you to become really successful, right, in writing grants and securing funding and contributing to myotonic dystrophy research. So next slide. So a little bit, and you, of course, or I hope you all know this, a little bit about the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation. Our vision is, of course, that we see a world with treatments and cures for myotonic dystrophy. And then the mission of our foundation, the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, is community, care, and a cure. And next slide. As part of our efforts accelerating research towards a cure, we have, of course, two priority areas. Number one is our grant program. Many of you are familiar with that. So it's myotonic dystrophy focused with opportunities designed for early career scientists. And as we touch base upon later a little bit, high risk exploratory grants to get you ready for those awards. The second component is mentoring. We want to help you and we want to help develop young investigators to strengthen grant applications and secure funding. And that's why we are organizing today's webinar. So the agenda for today is we introduce the speakers. Then we present an overview of the funding opportunities. Then we have, of course, the presentation followed hopefully by a very robust and hopefully very lengthy Q&A session. Then Nadine will tell us about the new MDF grant programs and the dates for important dates, when to do what by. And then in closing, we talk about assignments and next steps, as this webinar today is not meant as a self-standing unit, right? This is a sequence of events, and please take it serious. Please help us. We put a lot of effort and researcher time effort into that, so you can be successful. So next slide, please. So a little bit of housekeeping. This is an interactive event, even though we have presentation, and please ask questions live. Use the Q&A function. We'll curate those, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. Nadine and I will moderate this. Next slide. So now it's our great pleasure to introduce panel members and of course the folks making this all possible. And we have a very lengthy introduction here for Dr. Andy Berkland. I don't think it's needed, but of course he's very, very accomplished. He's a professor at the University of Albany. He's also the director of the RNA Institute. He's the co-director of the Center of Excellence in RNA Research and Therapeutics at this institution. He's also a distinguished professor at the Department of Biological Sciences and recipients of numerous awards. Most importantly, for our community, Andy also serves as the chair of our foundation's scientific advisory committee, and in this capacity, he sits on the MDF board of directors. So, Andy, I'd like to hand it over to you to introduce John.
Thanks, Andy R. I'm just excited to see all our trainees on the webinar, and I'm really looking forward to interacting with you all. Hopefully all of you can make it to the MDF conference, where we have our Young Investigator Workshop and track. And with that, I'll introduce John Cleary, a good friend and colleague. I've known John for many years. John precedes me in the myotonic dystrophy field, so he's a deep expert. And I think one of the amazing things about John is he loves to write, and he's an incredible writer. And he's been so successful writing grants, both here at the University of Albany, but also at the University of Florida, and also helping others be successful. And I think one of the things you're going to hear from John is, it's not always going to work that first time, and you have to keep doing it. So John was one of our early MDF research fellows in 2011, and where he studied the genetic mechanisms of myotonic dystrophy. And since completing his fellowship, he was a postdoctoral fellow with Laura Ranum, and now he's the assistant director of the RNA Institute, and also one of the sort of leaders in our Center of Excellence in RNA Research and Therapeutics. And with that, John, take it away.
All right, thanks, Andy. Here. All good? Awesome. Okay. So as Andy mentioned, I'm John Cleary. I'm here to talk to you about funding opportunities. Just a quick disclosure statement. I work at the University of Albany, but I also have a part-time position at the University of Florida Center for Neurogenetics under Dr. Laura Ranum, and a number of other affiliations. Before I start, I wanted to have a disclaimer statement. This doesn't mean I'm going to say anything weird about the MDF or anything like that, or what we're talking about today. What I really want to stress is I'm going to give you advice. I tell everybody who comes to see me, and I usually do this type of thing one-on-one, is I'm going to give you advice. You don't necessarily have to follow it. You have to go sort of with your instincts. You're going to be the expert on your subject matter. So just treat everything I say today as advice, not rules. And obviously, you want to seek input from everybody around you on your grant opportunities. So my talk today is divided into 3 sections. A really brief section on sort of some of the available grants and fellowships. This is not going to be exhaustive. It's just sort of a summary of some of the ones that are out there for graduate students and early career postdocs. Then I'll talk about some of more best practices for securing funding, mostly focused on NIH, but I'll also touch on NSF and DoD, and then finish off with sort of some common pitfalls that we've seen in reviewing MDF applications, as well as other applications in general. So you may want to ask yourself, like, where do you find out about grants? What's the best method? There's no sort of one set way of actually doing it. Best thing to do is check with your grant office at your institution or division of research or whoever that particular vice president of research is called. They often have a number of different software or even AI packages that they can help you, that you can enter in your search criteria you're looking for, myotonic dystrophy, neurogenic disorders, repeat expansions, and then they'll just go out the web and surf, and they'll spit you back, usually weekly. You can have it do it daily summary of the available grants and opportunities. You can also sign up for grant and fellowship email updates from the NIH. I'll be distributing these slides afterwards. So anything where it says link, you'll be able to click that in the PDF that's generated. Another thing you could potentially do is reverse search for a funding opportunity. So if you're not familiar, you should be familiar with the NIH Reporter NSF Award Search. There's a similar one for DoD. That's where you can basically go on and type myotonic dystrophy into the search, and it pulls back all the DM research funded at the NIH or NSF. And that's oftentimes something I do, especially if it's a new area, find out who's actually been funded. Then through that, you can actually find out what program they apply to, what institute they apply to, and then sort of what their success rate was, and sort of what the terms they use to sort of be successful in that. One thing to remember in all this sort of looking for grant opportunities, don't be too restrictive when you're searching. Think laterally about opportunities. Don't just enter myotonic dystrophy type 1, because you're not going to get, stuff related to DM2 or stuff related to repeat expansion. So try to expand out to less restrictive terms. You'll get a whole bunch of stuff back, but it's pretty easy to sort through, a page or two of grant opportunities and say, this one works, this one doesn't work, and this one is perfect for me. And then you go in and find more information about that. So one of the first areas that's probably the best location for you to actually look for grants is location restricted grants. That means stuff that's close to home. Like within your lab, there could be administrative supplements, extra service, teaching mentorship, internships. That's something you definitely want to talk to your PI, discuss funding opportunities. They all also have a good view of the funding opportunities at your location, as well as within the NIH or NSF or whoever funds the lab. You can also talk to your departmental chair or the admin within that. Travel awards, tuition rebates, thesis competitions. There could be departmental travel awards like T32s, for example. We have one here at the R&D Institute. And this is all sort of like, they may not necessarily be a fellowship that covers the entire portion of your salary or funds your entirety of your work, but they're helping you to build a resume that helps sort of get the ball rolling in terms of future funding opportunities. The more you can show people that you are successful and people have acknowledged that success, the better you will be in the future. Again, going further out within your university, you can talk to your division of research or whatever. Could be training grants or named fellowships specifically for STEM, for example, or biological sciences or chemistry or whatever. And there are also broad college level or field specific training programs like a neuroscience T32 that spans different departments. And that's a way you can sort of get funding, but also get recognition for the excellent work that you do. And also within the state, again, state agencies, internships, fellowships that could be add-ons to your existing funding. And each one of these things, you'd be sort of competing with more and more people. So obviously the ones that are closer to you, you're going to have less competition. The more broader you get until you get to the national and the federal level, those are going to be highly competitive. So go for the easy targets first, and then work your way out. Obviously, I'll talk about NIH a little bit next. One of the things, obviously, foundations like the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, Nadine's going to talk about this at the end. Other ones to consider, the American Heart Association. And so wherever you see a globe here, that's meaning it's eligible for people from outside the US or for non-US citizens. I try to sort of highlight that, or grants that are more restricted to US citizens. So American Heart has a number of different fellowships, pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, career development, one specifically focused on brain health. Another great funding organization for myotonic dystrophy research is the Muscular Dystrophy Association. They have a development grant, a research grant, and an idea grants. Sort of, these are mostly on the postdoctoral to early career faculty seed grant type of ideas. Another one that potentially for those of us that are more sort of translationally focused is the Farm A Foundation. They have both pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, and early career. They actually gave a really great seminar just yesterday that I went to, and their website has a number of really great videos on sort of some of the stuff is specific to them, like the application advice specific to the Farm A, but their talks on tips on writing grants, how to write a standout letter of intent, innovative grant applications. Those things are actually really good ideas. So I really urge people, the link will be in here, to go on this website, watch those videos. It'll be much the same stuff that I'm covering today, but it gives you a lot of different opinions. And that's kind of what you're looking for here, is different ways and finding the way that works best for you to write the most compelling research grant. Obviously, one of the things, NIH is the F31, F32 mechanism for pre-doctoral or MD PhD, that's F31 and F30 respectively, as well as the F32 postdoctoral. Duration is up to 3 years. The funding amounts are varies depending on what program it is, and some of the duration depends on the institution award. These unfortunately only U.S. citizens or residents. And for this, some of the important documents, I'll talk a little bit about this later, but the application background and training goal, you really want to sort of, for this, tell your academic research story, where you want to go, what training you need, include sort of mixes of courses and hands-on material. Your research strategy, really discussing the feasibility. You want to coordinate what you're going to do for research with your training goals. How are you going to acquire new skills? And again, for this one, another important thing is your sponsor and co-sponsor statements. They really you want to investigate it with a good NIH track record, good mentoring track record. You want to make sure that's highlighted in those statements. That's something your sponsor, your PI will write. And sort of have a team approach to this, and really address any gaps in your training funding through the fellowship itself. NSF is another one, Graduate Research Fellowship Program, really great website, NSF. It gives great flexibility. You can take it anywhere you want to go. You're not sort of tied down to one location. The timing for this one is important. You can actually only apply once when you're sort of a first graduate student. And it's important to remember with the NSF, health-related research, direct health-related research is ineligible for these topics. So you may think, well, that sort of means that you can't get funded from myotonic dystrophy, but you got to think about the basic research that is translational to myotonic dystrophy. For example, alternative splicing, which is, you know, the cause of the spliceopathy that is DM1. The alternate splicing itself is a fundamental biological mechanism. That's something the NSF would fund, not the translational aspect. And then NSF has distinct wording from the NIH. So if you haven't applied there before, I definitely recommend talking to somebody who's been funded by the NSF to see how they like to word things and how they like to structure their grants. It's quite unique. And I know myself, coming from like a NIH background, when I started to apply for NSF grants with Andy at the R&D Institute, it took a little while. It actually took us, I think, 3 or 4 times to get one grant, just to sort of understand the language the NSF wants and how they want things worded relative to the NIH. Another big grant that is going to be more important for the postdoctoral fellows is a K99R00. You must already be a postdoc to apply for this. The important thing is it will support non-US citizens, although the R00 phase must be within the United States. The focus for this one, track record, make sure you have really good pubs, great preliminary data, a very specific and detailed training plan. They want to know how you're going to take the money, which comes to you in a K99 phase as a postdoc, can then be transferred into an independent career in the R00 phase. They really want to see your training phase for the K99 address any of your training deficiencies, really specifically what you want to handle during the K99, and then how that will ensure your success as an independent scientist in your R00 phase at a different institution. This one, it's really important you talk your K99 R00, talk with your mentor, talk with a program officer at the institute that you're thinking of applying to. And again, this is a really great mechanism for postdocs. It covers your salary as your K99. It gives you sort of a little bit of panache. And then when you're applying for those early career faculty positions, you have a budget to actually start your lab, which I think a lot of institutions will like. And it's really, we really value K99 R00 applicants for faculty positions. So one thing I wanted to tackle here was, I hope to do this a long time ago, was like talk about diversity supplements. It's a great funding source. Unfortunately, the budget cuts kind of destroyed that. They're gone for now, as far as I understand, but there's a possibility they could come back. They do include, diverse backgrounds such as first-generation college, rural areas. This is one of the fastest funding mechanisms I've actually seen, at least at the NINDS, which is I'm more familiar with. Submit in November, we've heard about funding in December. So it's really quick, and it covers multiple levels: undergrad, graduate, post-bac, all the way to postdoc and early career. And then, so when the diversity supplements sort of got cut or haven't been renewed, I would think, well, okay, that's fine. We can actually go do the DoD. And then again, some of the congressionally directed medical research programs are actually on the slate to be cut partially for this year's budget. But again, one thing I want to talk there's a number of great options at the CDMRP for postdoc and early career PIs, including ALS, DMD, and DM-specific funding through the peer-reviewed medical program. Open to non-US citizens. It's very translationally focused. And one thing to remember, it's military adjacent. So you don't need to have like a direct impact on active military activities. We're talking about research that will have impact veterans, military families, and the such. And everybody seems to think that there's a horrible paperwork to do with the DoD. It's not as bad as you think. It's more paperwork, but it's a really great flexible funding opportunity. So I really urge people to check this out. And then, like I said, there's the peer review medical program has DM as one of the 41 diseases that it covers. So just a shout out to our Canadian colleagues. I'm Canadian. There are a number of different opportunities within Canada. If you're zooming in from Canada, there's graduate fellowships through the NIH as well as the NSF. There's the Banting postdoctoral fellowship. CASR fellowships. And if you're in Canada and you're a non-Canadian citizen, both the Vanier and the Banting postdoctoral fellowships are available to non-Canadian citizens. Unfortunately, I don't have more information about European specific fellowships, but I'm sure they're out there. You just need to do a little bit searching and digging. And if I find those resources, I'll try to incorporate them in updates to the slides. So that's just sort of quick overview of some of the funding. There's a lot more stuff out there. Like I said, you just have to do a little bit of searching, and we'll try to have those more information updated. So some of the reasons you want to apply, you want to sort of get the ball rolling. The more funding success you can show earlier on, the more it sort of builds and progresses. It gives you great experience, it gives you some prestige. Like I said, it gets you started on the funding cycle, so you can show that, no, I've been funded previously. This is why you want to fund me now. Another thing you do, even if you don't have any success in the funding cycle, you're going to get feedback not only on your research, but how to write grants. And this is great. Sometimes a failed funding application will send you off into a new area or show you a thing that you hadn't considered. So it's always really good. Obviously, extra funding for a specific project is great. You can go off into a new area, or you can balance, your research from your training or acting, as a graduate student from TAing. One thing always to remember is balance. You don't want to spend all your time just writing grants and not actually doing the basic research. It's something you'll have to learn. Is this particular grant worthwhile? Do I have the credentials to be successful in it? What will I gain from doing it? And that's something you can always discuss with your mentor and other people around you. You don't want to spend an exorbitant amount of time working on a grant that you have no success of getting. So you need to sort of balance the amount of time you put into the grant with the amount of time you're actually doing your research. And it takes a while to sort of understand that balance. And it's just something you just have to work on. So now I'm going to switch over to sort of more best practices for securing funding. It's basically going to go through, mostly for NIH grants, it's just going to go through some basic best practices, general tips and stuff like that. So one thing I just want to start off with is sort of general tips. Begin early. So one thing I cannot stress enough is when you find out about the funding mechanism, that's when you should really start. Try to come up with a specific aims and abstract, sometimes a budget, whatever works for you. You want a quick, short way to sort of get your ideas down onto paper and then share with other people. That's another thing. Make sure you read the funding announcement, read it carefully, read it once, read it twice, read it 3 times, and make sure you follow those application guidelines. If they say, we don't want to talk about disease, don't talk about disease or you're not going to get funded. If the RFA has a specific requirement, make sure you meet that requirement. There's always laid out. You don't want to get to the sort of 11th hour when you're submitting a grant and realize you're missing a letter of support from your institution that you don't have. So read it, develop a checklist, make sure you have everything, and make sure everything early. And definitely work with your PI and mentor. They're going to give you great advice, even if it's something they haven't submitted to previously. And you want to discuss with them, do you have the time to do this grant application and also do your research and any other activities that you have to do. When you're writing the grant itself, remember to be explicit and specific, but not exhausting. You don't want to read about PCR conditions when you're actually writing the approach section to your grant. So you only want to really highlight anything really specific like that if it's unusual and germane to your particular research. Be realistic with your timelines. Don't propose like 5 years of work in 2 years. And I'll get a little bit more into that later on in terms of pitfalls. Again, follow the application guidelines. I can't stress this enough. Look at them, find out what you need, make sure you have everything ahead of time. If they give you a specific order, you're like, we're focused on this particular area, make sure that language is mirrored back in your document itself. And then get it reviewed before you submit. Get it reviewed by your lab mates, get it reviewed by your PI, get it reviewed by mentors on your committee. You basically want to make sure other people have looked at it, especially other people with different viewpoints. Maybe someone who's not an expert in DM. Because it's got the people reviewing your grant often may not necessarily be an expert on DM or expert on chemistry or biology. And you want to make sure it's understandable to the broadest potential reviewer population. If you're successful in your grant application, read the reviews, tell your institution that you were successful, and stay involved in the process for establishing a grant. I guarantee that staying involved and understanding what's going on will sort of prevent any hiccups in terms of getting the money, understanding what your timeline is for doing the progress reports, financial reports, all that stuff. You want to be involved in that. And if you're not successful, learn, reapply, and apply again and apply again. Read the reviews, take them hard, take some time to think about it. I know when you first initially get them, you'll be like, I don't agree with this. They're all wrong. They didn't know what they're talking about. Take some time, review it, talk to other people, talk to your PI, also talk to the program officer, ask them questions. They may not be able to give you specific advice and you need to do this, but in talking to you, they'll sort of understand what the particular competition pool was like. And then once you get all that, revise it and apply again. And then, like I said, rinse and repeat. Just keep on applying, making sure you're changing each time, and so that the application grows with you and grows with your research. So let's look at a specific aims page here. I don't expect you to read all the information, but just sort of in general, how do you craft a specific aims page? That's a question we often get. And here's some sort of tips and tricks that I've learned. You want to basically start general. Don't jump headfirst into your very specific information. Talk about what the problem is. Here you're obviously talking about repeat expansion diseases in general, and then narrowing down into DM. And then from that general information, you don't want to spend a huge background. Quickly transition to what the problem you're looking at. Are you looking at cognitive issues with DM? Are you looking at reproductive issues? Are you looking at muscle issues? So you want to go from the very general to the very specific really quickly, and then outline what the problem is. There's not enough research on the cognitive aspect of DM, for example, and then quickly transition to what is your solution or what's your hypothesis. And then after that, a little bit about a brief data, if you have it for preliminary data, or a brief overview of what you're proposed to do, and then jump straight into the specific aims. Again, this is sort of what has worked for me. You may have a different approach entirely. This, as you can see, is all text. I've seen people put, figures in the specific aims. Not something I would do, but it particularly worked for this person that I saw. For the specific aims itself, basically, it's almost like a little mini grant itself. What's the rationale for doing it? What's the approach you're going to do? And the approach is not detailed conditions. It's just sort of what you're going to do for it. And then what will that accomplish? I really like to end my specific aims with an impact statement. What will happen if this specific aim is successful, not only at a specific level, but also on a broader level? What does it tell you about the disease? What does it tell you about the situation? And then often a question I get is 2 versus 3 aims. It really doesn't matter as long as they're logically laid out. I usually just go with 3 aims, but if it works better for the logic of 1 aim versus the other, 2 versus 3 doesn't really matter. It's just focus on what the information is in there. The one thing you do want to avoid, and I'll hit this again in the pitfalls, is avoid interdependence. If aim 2 cannot start even without the results of aim 1, you're dead in the water. You need to rethink your approach and how you can start aim 2 without even the results from aim 1. And then one thing I've done, it's not done in this one, is look for broader impact at the ending. If you have a little bit of space at the end, what are the global impacts of this particular project? And that is sort of roughly the specific aims. These are great to give to a program officer, to your mentor, to a reviewer or somebody in the field, because this gives them really within 1 page what is actually going to go into your grant. And then they can give you, comments about the grant itself without actually getting too granular into the specifics. So in terms of research plan, I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on the research plans because a lot of this is specific to, your individual project. This is broken down sort of as an NIH in terms of significance and background. One thing I like to do there is make sure you use signposts, basically language and formatting that tells the reviewer what you're talking about. So italicize the long-term objectives of this project are, or my general strategy is, so that they can quickly, if they're scanning through the page and they may not read every word, they may just sort of oh, okay, this is what they want to do, and this is how they're going to do it. Like the specific aims, you want to sort of start big picture and quickly translate into the knowledge gap or the problem that you're trying to solve. Think about the things is oftentimes people put a lot of stuff in their specific aims, and I just end up cutting it out. That information that you couldn't put it in your specific aims, that can go into your significant backgrounds. It helps you sort of flush out the problem itself, the literature, the field. Here you can highlight gaps in the literature. Like you want to definitely tell people it's unknown about this, or the role is, people know about this particular splicing pathway, but its role in disease is currently unknown. So you clearly tell them what the problem or what the gap is in the field and how you're going to solve that particular gap. Definitely use subheadings to organize the content and include easy to read figures. You want it really easy for people to go from one section to the next. Don't just cram a whole bunch of text in there. The easier it is for them to read and go from section to section, the better it will be that they understand the concept you're going through. And then you also want to basically summarize how this particular grant will contribute to the field at the sort of the end of this section before you start getting into the innovation or the approach section. And so innovation section, big in NIH, you want to, a lot of people have problems, difficulties writing this section. Don't be afraid to state the obvious, like this proposal is innovative because I use a new construct, or I've developed a new mouse model, or something to that level. A lot of people try to get cute with this, but sometimes it's just better just to hit the nail on the head and just be, this is why this is innovative. You don't necessarily have to go negative on other techniques or other approaches, but you clearly want to state like what are the technical and scientific innovations and the broader impacts, because that could be an innovation as well. Not necessarily a specific result, but the impact of that result on the field or on broader society. And then the approach is yourself. This is where the bulk of the grant is going to be. I usually give it you're going to break it down into each specific aim. Again, it's sort of a mini grant there, a little bit of background, tiny little background, tiny bit of rationale so that they understand, maybe you made a point in the background that you want to reintroduce an approach if it's really germane to that specific approach. Only a few sentences before you sort of jump into the approach itself. And this is where you can put preliminary data. Often it can go in the background itself, section itself, but you don't want a lot of distance between your preliminary data and then when you're sort of leveraging that preliminary data to push the field forward. So oftentimes you can put a little bit of preliminary data at the beginning of your approach. Again, like I said before, sub-aim headings and subheadings to sort of break up the text, molecular characterization, behavioral characterization. You want to make it easy for them to understand what you're doing. And if they have a particular thing they want to look at, you want to be able to hone in on that itself. Expected results, alternative approaches. You want to say, what do you expect from these results? And then clearly think of, I know you think the research may work, but what happens if it doesn't work? What are your alternative approaches you're going to use? And that's also a good place sometimes when you think that the aim is like way too big. You can take a thing out and put it into the alternative approach to say like, well, if my main part didn't work, this is one area I'm actually going to do, but only if the main part doesn't work. And that way you're not sort of cramming too much grant into one specific aim itself. Another thing to touch upon is BioSketch. Know which type you're going to need, because the difference between NIH, NSF, sometimes foundations have specific formats themselves. Become familiar with the Sci NCV. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it's required for NSF, and as of May 2025, it will be required for NIH. You sort of have to go in and fill in all your information, but it saves it so that next time you do an NIH BioSketch, you just have to redo it again. And you can also designate a delegate if you want to sort of help you fill this out. There's a slight difference between non-fellowships and fellowships. For fellowships, there's a section D, which is a scholastic performance. I'll get a little bit into that in the next slide. So BioSketch personal statement. This is sort of someplace I often see people sort of go wrong. Here, you really have a chance to speak directly to your reviewers about your personal background, your personal experience. You're marketing yourself in this section. You want to really highlight your strengths. Write in first person. I did this. I did this experiment. I chose to go to PhD, or I selected this lab. You obviously want to, because it's a bit of a story, you want to start off with your general statement about your long-term research goals or your, where you want to go. And you really want to focus on your training and accomplishments, but not just basically said, like, I worked in the Berkeley lab and I learned qPCR, splicing analysis, fragment. You don't want to just sort of state that in terms of just, I did these techniques, unless that technique is relevant to the proposal. You really want to focus on your outcomes. What was the project? What happened with the project? You want to tell a story, make it flow. If your results other people used for years to come and a whole bunch of stuff came out of it, you want to talk about that. I developed a qPCR technique that is now the standard in the lab and has resulted in 10 different publications. Even if you're not on the publications, your technique sort of helped those. The personal statement is also great for highlighting existing collaborations that support the project, especially if you don't have those documented elsewhere. You can say, like, I'm excited to work on this project with Dr. So-and-so, who's an expert in stem cells and will teach me how to use stem cells. You can also cite interim research projects here, sort of like stuff in bioarchives. Personal statements, really important if you have a chance to address any gaps in your biosketch or obvious career issues, time off for children's, withdraw for medical reasons, issues with your previous supervisor. You want to address those head on in the personal statement. You can also address them in your letters of support from your PI or your co-sponsors. But you really, if you have a gap, you may not feel like talking about it, but it's best to address that head on. You don't have to get in technical details, but it's like, I'm no longer in contact with my former supervisor and I'm unable to get a reference from him. You really want to address that there rather than the person sort of looking like, why isn't their supervisor providing a letter, or why do they have this 3-year gap in their CV? Don't really know what's going on. You don't want them questions. You want to really state it there. And for postdocs, your personal statement is a great place to say what parts of your research that you're doing right now can you take with you into an independent position. You also want that reiterated in your current supervisor's letter as well. So-and-so is excellent and wonderful. The part of my project that has to do with spinal cerebral-ataxias, he can take or she can take with them to an independent position, and I'm happy to provide resources for that. You really want that clearly laid out, bolded, italicized, underlined in the letter of support. It could also be in your personal statement. Positions, scientific honors, pretty standard. For you junior investigators, just think about it's not just paid positions and full-time, it's unpaid, part-time, volunteer. You can sort of bolster that section with a number of different things. A graduate student, you can list both your graduate student and also your teaching separately. Clinicians, it can be licensures, board certifications, study sections, society membership, board membership, consulting, grant review, project review, stuff like that can go into this section. And then for section D, the scholastic performance, pre-docs, make sure you list everything, institution and year, postdocs, same thing. For international students, if there's a different scoring in your country than the GPA, and you're obviously applying to the NIH or the NSF, make sure you explain that scoring. Don't just simply assume that it's going to transfer over or that they'll understand what 100% or an A+ or whatever means from your country. You really want to make sure it is easy as possible for the reviewers to understand what that score meant in terms of your program. Section C, contributions to science. This is another area that I often see people have problems with. You have 5 different contributions. For undergraduates and graduate students, if you're left with experience, you're not going to have 5 different sections. You can do it in chronological order. In high school, this is the research I did. As a summer student, this is research I did. As a graduate student, this is research I did. And there may or may not be publications associated. We just want to understand what were some of the key findings, or it could just be one publication or experience as one of those contributions. You did a summer program in ecology, and this is what you sort of learned. As you get more progressive in your career, you replace it with sort of a summary of what you did, and then publications associated with that. And for postdoc and early careers, obviously, try to organize that into discrete areas of research. Choose your best publications to highlight. You can include manuscripts in preparation. But don't just have like 2, and then list 5 publications. Try to group them together, frame the problem, highlight what your work did, and any subsequent findings, even if it's not yours. Like you developed an assay, or your paper results were then taken by the lab and extended to multiple different organisms or multiple different model systems. You really want to show the impact of your research, your overall contributions to science. And if you have a bunch of different topics or publications that don't really directly relate to each other, think of like if there's a linking or overarching theme. As you can see here in this example, developing small molecules and other therapeutics for repeat expansion diseases. Bunch of different topics covered here, SCAs, DM, different types of diseases, but it's all sort of linked together with that overall summary. So we covered, research plan, biosketches. Another thing that you often have for funding applications is sort of an applicant statement and a training goal. There's a little bit of overlap with a personal statement from the biosketch, but really often these want to be a little bit more information. You want to tell your academic and research story. Include your decisions. Don't just say like, I went here, then I went here, then I went here. Why did you select that particular lab? What did you like about it? How did that contribute to your overall progress as a researcher? Were you interested in neurobiology? Then why did you go to an ecology lab? Like, sort of explain it and come up with an overarching flow or story to your research career to date. Focus on your project outcomes in this section. This project resulted in publications, posters, awards, stuff like that. That's really want to highlight how your career has come to date. There's often a section about what's your training goals or how you will proceed to independence. Here, you really want to identify specific areas where you need training. Outside of your PhD program, you're going to take courses, stuff like that. But like, what courses and hands-on skills do you need to complete this project? This is more for obviously fellowships and stuff like that. If you're writing like an R01, you wouldn't necessarily have this type of thing. This is specifically for fellowships. What do you need to learn in order for this project, and not only the project, but yourself to be successful? And then identify where you're going to get that and how it relates back to your research, and have it in a logical order. Like if your project involves mouse work from day one, don't say, a year from now, you're going to get some mouse training. You're going to get the mouse training, then you're going to do the mouse work, and that's going to ensure the success of your program. Activities and timeline. This is important for a lot of different training grants. K99 is one of them. It's really good to have a timeline. We'll see in the next slide. I'll go through sort of two specific examples of a really complex or really simple timeline. You really want to think about what are your goals, for example, faculty position, work backwards from that and figure out what training activities you will need or career development activities you'll need to support that all the way up until the time that you apply for the grant or you will potentially start the grant. And then group things in different subcategories, skills, mentoring, career development. You don't have to be necessarily too specific. Like I will take this course with this course number for like 6 weeks. Just sort of, divide into this quarters, for example. You're going to do training in, iPSC cells in the first quarter, and then I'll go into something else. Make sure you check your grant instructions or the RFA for specific training requirements. They may specifically state, be sure to show you have a training in rigor and reproducibility or clinical skills or something specific, and make sure that's in your timeline so that if there's anybody sort of like checking boxes, they can go timeline, okay, training skills, okay, that's great. Last thing they often ask you to do is highlight your training environment. Don't just highlight your supervisor or your PI. Identify the entire team and identify what they're going to provide you and how it advances your goal. Show that you put some forethought into the people that are mentoring you and how that will sort of advance. If you want to go into industry, make sure you have some mentors that have industry experience. Or if you want to go into a specific neurological program, make sure you have neurologists that are part of your thing, your training environment. And then you also want to highlight what's unique about your institution. What resources do you have that make it the best place for you to do this particular program? Like if you don't have a strong stem cell component, where's that going to come from? You want to be really sort of like what specific interactions you're going to have, how that will sort of advance your research goals. If you don't have a strong chemistry component, but you want to make small molecules in your grant, for example, where are you going to get those chemistry skills? How are you going to get them? Is it going to international conferences? Is it partnering with another institution? You want to be sort of specific address your research plan and how your training will support that. So timeline. So here's two examples of, for example, on the left-hand side, it's a K99R00, relatively complicated timeline. And on the right-hand side is more sort of a traditional 3-year simple timeline. Both of them work. Obviously, the K99, it's very specific, what skills they're going to learn. You can see they sort of divided into like research, skills training, computational training, coursework, mentoring. These are all things that will be mentioned in the RFA for the K99. And you can see sort of how it's laid out. It's not very detailed. It's aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, but it still tells them when those will happen, how that works between the K99 phase, which is the postdoc phase, and the R00 phase, which is the independent phase. What skills they're going to learn, and this will obviously be accompanied by a little bit of text that explains it in a little more details. But you can see here they have conferences planned out. They have their pathway to independence. So you have to do preparing interviews, finding positions, all that stuff sort of built into this 2-year K99. And then you're talking about in the R00 phase, success of that is independent funding. So it's, you can see there, resubmitting R00s and stuff like that. And then publication timeline. That's a very complicated, detailed timeline for K99 R00. For a regular fellowship, you may just want to have something on the right-hand side, relatively simple. 3 activities you do each year, roughly where you're going to do them. They may overlap between the years. A research skill, a mentoring skill, and then talk about the data you're going to generate it from that. Relatively simple. One thing you can do is actually make that a figure, so you can actually scale it really easy. So you can sort of scale it down, put it in there. Don't do a word table in the research plan. It just takes up too much space. You can just make it a scalable image, much easier. Budget. This is another thing that people have problems with or have problems starting. Easiest thing to do, ask for a template from your grant or research office or your mentor. And make sure it's specific to, if you're doing a fellowship, it's a fellowship grant template, not an R00, because there's a lot of stuff you don't have to need for a fellowship. I'll show you a sort of a traditional budget on the side. Make sure your budget reflects what you propose. You have a lot of mouse work, make sure that's covered somewhere, either in the budget or the budget justification or your letters of support. One thing, what may be obvious to you, and this is a lot applicable to our colleagues outside of the United States, may not necessarily be obvious to your reviewers. Document any support that you have, especially for expensive work, mouse work, IPSC work, patient studies. It's possible that those are covered by your institution and sort of built in, but if you're somebody from the US, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So think about your target audience, like I said, especially if you're outside the US. Maybe there's not a lot of expenses to do with healthcare in your country. So getting a bunch of patients in and doing that, you don't have to account for that. Somebody in the US may not necessarily know that, and they look at your budget and say there are holes in it. So where's that money coming from? You really want to be clear for that, especially if you're outside the system that you're applying for. Make sure you ask for what you need. You don't want to be sort of stingy. It's sort of a general rule that women generally ask for less than men. Sort of institutional issues with that. You just want to make sure your budget is realistic and it covers what you want to do. And then also make sure you run your budget by your internal grant office. That's usually required to submit, and make sure you get into them early. And then avoid traps where we're going things that are particularly easy. Sometimes it's easier to do an NIH modular budget. That's where you just ask for chunks of $25,000 up to $250,000 or $275,000. You don't have to do a lot of justification. But if that doesn't cover the research you're gonna do, it doesn't do you any good, because then you have to do a bunch of research. You don't have enough money for doing it. And it would have been better in your case to spend a little extra time, get a detailed budget, and ask for $300,000 or $400,000. Or that's if you're doing an R00. So just make sure your budget can support the work that you say it's going to do. And if it's not obviously how it does that, then you have an explanation for it. So here's just a quick example of a budget for a postdoctoral position. Obviously, just sort of general, something I made up, but you would basically, first thing you do when you do the budget, check your funding announcement, make sure everything is set. Some things you may notice, there's key personnel. Those are people who can't be changed easily, or other personnel that can change. usually the PI or the graduate student or the person for the fellowship is key. One thing to remember is when you're coming up with a budget, there's fringe associated with your salary. So there's a 64K for salary. There's also 21K to cover healthcare costs, which adds up. So you may not necessarily have as much money as you think it is going to do. You could see the equipment there and be like, oh, great, I can ask for equipment to support my work. Most RFAs don't cover that. So you have to actually read the funding announcement to make sure if equipment is covered, and that equipment has to be germane or very specific for your focus project. Participant support, you can generally ignore that for most fellowships and early career. That's usually for a training grant. Materials and supply, this is often an area where people sort of just throw money in there. You won't have to justify it. You can check with your lab about how much it does cost. This is especially important for early career or postdocs, where you're writing your first grant. You want to sort of have an understanding of how much it actually costs. My rule of thumb is for every full-time effort, so for every 12 months of effort by someone, make sure you have between $10,000 to $20,000 in supplies. It differs. If you're a mouse lab doing a lot of histology, a lot of really expensive stuff, you're gonna be upwards around 20K. If you're sort of a chemistry, simple biology one, you may be down to 10K. But it becomes pretty obvious if you're reading these as a reviewer, and it's a lot of work, a lot of people, and they're asking for like $5,000 worth of supplies. It doesn't sort of add up, and it makes you sort of wonder whether they understand the true scope of their particular grant that they're asking for. Materials and supplies may be limited, especially for some fellowships. You may just have $1,000 or $2,000, and if you have cost covered elsewhere, for example, your PI is going to provide all the supplies for your fellowship. Make sure that's specified somewhere, either in the budget justification or in their letter of support, saying like, I will provide. This is more important for postdoctoral fellows. I will provide the necessary resources and supplies for this particular project. Otherwise, it becomes ambiguous, and you don't know if, as a reviewer, whether that person has the support or where the money is actually going to come from for the particular project. Other things to talk about in the other cost or miscellaneous expenses, publication costs. If you can budget it, they're a lot more expensive than they used to be. Rental fees for core facilities, that's something your PI may absorb for you, but if you're a postdoc or whatever, you may want to provide those. Animal costs, that's usually where I put this. It can also be in the materials and supplies. I've seen it both ways. And then the budget justification, if it's a regular NIH grant, is a good place to sort of justify your animal numbers so that basic math isn't sort of stuck in the research plan and taking up space. And then the last thing is indirect F&A rate. I think everybody knows what indirect costs are now, but just check the RFA. Sometimes it's limited. Some places say no indirect costs. Other places say 10%. If it doesn't say, your institution will usually push for the largest amount. But usually it's within the RFA. I don't know how am I doing in time? A little bit long here. So some common pitfalls to avoid. Yeah. Okay. So I'll go through these last couple of slides relatively quickly. Again, these will be available for you afterwards. My favorite quote: "Lies, damn lies, and statistics." Even though that's a quote, always include stats analysis in your results, either in the research plan or a separate section. You can literally have a section that says rigor and reproducibility through biological replicates. Talk about the stats you're going to do. You don't have to do the details. The fact that you're going to do stats, you're going to do like sex and gender. If you're only going to look at one gender, explain why. And for animal and human studies, include a power analysis. If you don't know, you can use previous results to estimate a power analysis. And if you've never done one, ask for help. This is really, really super critical and something we see in a lot of MDF grants, that people just don't include power analysis or stats entirely. I mean, you'll have it in your figure sometimes, but you really want a section that tells them, I've considered stats or I've considered power analysis. You can ask your PI, you can ask your biostats center, you can ask anybody to sort of point you in the right direction. One thing to remember, don't burn your ESI status, or early stage investigator. So with the NIH, you have 10 years from your terminal degree or postgraduate clinical training. You're classified as an early stage investigator. It means you haven't successfully completed for a PI or PD on a grant. You can hold small grants like R00, R03s, R21s. But if you're like, say, a PI in a multi-PI grant, you'll lose your ESI status. And what that status does, it actually separates you from the rest of the reviews. They prioritize funding to ESI. And if the cutoff is a 13% for a grant and you're a ESI and you get a 17, you may still actually get funding. So if you don't know about this, check with your program officer. It's sort of difference between different institutions. And also check for ESI as an early career postdoc. ESI specific mechanisms like the MIRA, there's a MIRA specific for ESI. It's really important to consider this as you're transitioning from postdoc to early career, that you make sure you take full advantage of this so that your first R01, you're submitting under an ESI status and you get all the benefits from that. Another thing, ask for help. Reach out to your PI, to your mentor. The DM field, like I said, is really small, but it's extremely supportive. Another reason to stay in the field. Talk to people at meetings, not just sort of, hey, will you review my grant, but just talk to them, consider inviting them to your institution to give a talk, offer to assist during meetings like mic runners. You meet everybody. You really want to establish a relationship and then ask those people for help. Ask them early and be specific. Can I share my specific aims for some feedback? I need the feedback within a month because my deadline is September. And then be understanding. If you ask somebody for help, they may be busy and they may forget, but also be persistent because they're going to be busy and they may forget. So just, keep a reminding like a week later, or a couple of weeks later. It's like, hey, have you had a chance to look at this? They may or may not look at it, but at least you sort of created that relationship. Another thing to consider for grants, we versus I see this a lot, especially for non-US citizens and people with English as a first language. A lot of like, we did this, we did that. If you're writing a fellowship, that doesn't really tell me what you did, versus what the lab did. So give credit where credit is due, but don't hide or diminish your contributions. Like, for example, the Cleary lab set up this, I use that cell line to do this, or we have previously determined the blood-brain barrier undergoes significant degradation. Using that information, I designed and implemented. So it shows the reviewer what you specifically did, and that you're taking advantage of, you're stepping into a leadership and an independent role. You could also, if you can't do it in the research plan, you can also use the applicant statement, the biosketch, the letter of support to sort of clearly delineate what you did and how you specifically led the project. Because it's important to remember, for fellowships, they're investing in not only the research, but also investing in you and in your success. Another thing to think about is weak letters of support. That's another thing that can shoot down a fellowship or a grant. You want to identify your letter writers early, ask them, and clearly ask them, are they comfortable giving you a positive letter? Don't assume that your previous supervisor will give you a positive letter. Provide them with everything they need, your CV, your accomplishments, your specific aims, the date that they need those things. And if you can, it's really weird, I know, write them a draft letter about you. You can see sort of an outline here, how they know you, what you did in their lab, importantly, how you performed against other peers, like this is the top 1% person. Would they have you again is another thing. And like, that's great to say. It's like, if I could, I would have this person in my lab at the drop of a hat. That'll really tell them this is really a good person. Last slide here, other things to avoid, navel gazing, avoid sort of descriptive terms and sort of like, you want to use discrete language. I will determine this rather than sort of, I'm going to look at this. Again, independent aims, make sure that aims can go ahead. Aim 3 can go ahead regardless of aim 2 or aim 1. Again, obtuse funding sources. I mentioned if you have expensive experiments, but it's not covered in the budget, make sure it's identified somewhere who is paying for them. Commitment to field is another thing. If your lab is not focused, for example, on DM, what's the guarantee that you're going to stay in that field? It's good, and this is good to have connections with mentors in the specific field to show that commitment, and make sure you have strong support. If you're not a DM lab, make sure you have strong support and environmental support and field-specific support from somebody in DM. And another thing, don't put 5 pounds of science in a 2-pound sack. You want to be ambitious, but you don't want to propose like 3 clinical trials and 2 mouse work within 2 years. You want to identify, and if you can do that, you want to identify exactly how you can do that. And if there's something that you can outsource and it's not central to your training or the research plan, for example, mouse work, consider doing that. You really want to focus on the answers you're going to get, and how that will improve you as a scientist. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you at this time and probably gone a little bit over time, but I just wanted to sort of give everybody sort of an overview. Slides and the links and everything will be available afterwards. And I think we're happy to take questions now.
Yeah, so thank you very much, John. I'm going to go ahead and share. We will be taking questions, but we do recognize that we are at time. So if some people have to leave, that is okay. But we will take some time to answer questions. One of the things I want to announce before anyone leaves is our current research funding that is open. Sorry, it's taking a second to pop up there. All right. So we're very excited to announce our research fellowship, our flagship program for doctoral and postdoctoral researchers. It has launched today. It'll be due in September. And this program is open to anyone doing DM research around the world. We also have our Early Career Scholars Program, which is launching as well. This is a 2-year award for those in early career. We are having a slight change in how we're running it this year. There's going to be 2 separate tracks, a basic or translational science track, for which you will need any release from teaching in order to have time to focus on this research, and then a clinical research track for physician scientists. And this one you'll need some release from clinical service. So in our questions, we will also answer questions about this. And with this, I'm going to turn things over to Andy.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Nadine, and of course, thank you, John. So before we get to the questions, let's talk about the next steps. So you as the young investigators, please sign up for our conference as a young investigators. And then this webinar doesn't end here. So the next part is actually a homework assignment where we ask you to prepare an abstract and a specific aim, either of a fictional proposal or a real proposal. And then during the conference, you will have the opportunity to actually review that material with your mentor or mentor group. Also at the conference, we hold a specific young investigator track with a panel about career choices and so forth. And then the most important thing, please network. Use this opportunity to network. The last assignment is actually after the conference. So please stay in touch with your mentor and of course with MDF. So now before we go, so now let's transition to questions and answers. And I really want to thank John for the things he said and for the things he included. And we sit a lot, so Andy B and myself, we sit a lot in study sessions where we see grants from foundations at MDF, or we see them for NIH for large program projects, and you will not believe the errors and the rubbish is actually oftentimes the same we see for young investigators and we see for the old folks. So my request to you is please take the time, learn now. Writing is such a great skill. It's a super important skill whether you stay in academia and become a successful grant writer, but you need it if you go into industry, and you even need it when you go into finance or when you evaluate more grants. So the last plea I want to leave you with is the rubbish category. We see it even from seasoned investigators. Let's say you have 10 pages, they cram information in the smallest possible font with minute details into the application. And guess what? You frequently annoy the reviewers. And guess what? Frequently that is an automatic mark against you. Make your applications clearly structured, make them easy to read, connect the big picture, and that's a really, 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 really important prerequisite to get funding.
All right. So thank you, everyone. We will go ahead and open up questions. If we do not get to your question, we will share these questions right now with all our panelists. If we do not get to your question, we will follow up with you via email. So if you do want to ask a question, please go ahead and click on the Q&A button and then type your question into the text field. And you can send anonymously if you would like. So with that, we will go ahead and open to questions, and for those who are able to stay on and join us for it, thank you.
Hey, I can answer one of the questions that's in the chat already about, does DoD have a transition award that's similar to the K-99? Great question. They don't have that same mechanism. What they do have is they have a 2-year award that postdoctoral fellows or early career awardees can apply for. And you can use that funding to transition potentially to your own lab. I think one of the things you want to do as, say, a postdoctoral fellow looking for that type of funding is have conversations with your mentor that you're looking for funding that you can leverage into a faculty position. So it could be a DoD sort of idea award, or it could be an MDA development grant where you talk to your advisor and a mentor and say, I'd like to take the 3rd year of my MDA grant to start my own lab. Or you can make a plan with an R21 or other things where you become a co-investigator. So there are ways to do it. The NIH does have a very specific mechanism, but if you've missed that window or it's very competitive, there's other ways to be creative and do that.
Yeah, the other thing with the DoD is they do have the partnering option. That's where, you know, you have I've done this previously, you have a senior investigator who is the main person on the grant, and then they will provide a little bit extra for a partner on a specific area. So if you have a really good complementary skill to your senior PI and your senior postdoc, you could potentially get that grant. And the DoD gives that as 2 separate awards. It's one sort of structure, but 2 separate awards. So that's also not the same as K99R00, but again, it's an award in your name as a senior postdoc.
So then we got the next question that was, I'm really thankful for this one, and it's a bit longer, so let me read it. Some postdocs and early career investigators perform great work in low publishing labs, making it difficult to compete for funding. Is there a path to effectively pursue funding opportunities early in our careers with limited published work? So I want to take an opportunity and pick up what Andy B said. Andy B said that he used the term, go talk to people. The probability is that you are at larger research centers. So don't just hide in your lab and text people and do things. Go to other lab meetings, right? Go to department meetings, talk to people. So people are aware of your skill sets, and you might be actually very, very surprised that there might be opportunities, even as a graduate student, right, to contribute to a study, to contribute to that will ultimately lead in a publication. So even if you are with a PI, right, that has a low that only publishes very limited amount of work in very high quality journals, there might actually be opportunities in your environment to do that. Andy, Andy B, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would second what Andy R said. I also think it can be challenging when you get your NIH critique back, and maybe they liked your research, but they dinged you, due to productivity, or they view those publications as low impact. I think finding ways to address that through collaboration, as Andy R said, is a powerful way. I think other things you can do is, as John said, is you take that head on and you say, this is how that field is, and we published in this way, but it's still very productive. I think you just sometimes need to take those things on, but also know that it's a challenge and you want to find ways to overcome that challenge. So as Andy R said, maybe you have a high risk project that you're hoping is going to lead to a high impact publication. And you do need to advocate for yourself. I think finding ways to be an advocate for yourself and find others to advocate for you to get to build your CV, to build those publications. It is hard though. It is hard. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Because it is it's a great question.
Yeah, I think think of other outcomes that you can talk about other than the publications themselves. You know, like you did like a ton of mouse work, but the projects didn't work. Talk about the skills that you learn and the outcomes from that. Like you injected 1,000 mice for a 2-year study. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but you've gained a lot of great skills for that. And you can then propose complex mouse experiments that you know you can do because you've done it. You may not have published about it, but you have those skills.
And actually something when I'm reviewing for NIH for say F31s or the other mechanisms is I do want to see the presentations, the workshops you've done. So don't just focus on the publications. You can include abstracts. You want to demonstrate that you've been productive in lots of different ways. So be creative. You have to be a little careful, but be creative and include good things.
And there might be other interesting opportunities as a because guess what? Again, you're not just waking up one day and you realize, oh, I'm in a low publication environment. You kind of know that, right? Or you know, you might also know that you have your mentor, your primary PhD advisor is a stickler or something like this. So there are actually interesting strategies you can apply. For example, something I did, I published my the introduction to my dissertation as a review article in a second-tier journal. So it gave me two things. It gave me independence from the stickler, number one, and it gave me another publication. And these are strategies you just think outside the box, right? These are all things you can do and pursue.
Just something to pick up a little peripheral point is like, if you're an undergraduate or a graduate thinking about a postdoc, this is something to consider: is the lab you're potentially going to, what is their publication record? How often do they publish? Things you can directly address when you're interviewing for a postdoctoral position, like what their philosophy of publication. Do they cram a whole bunch of together and get one big paper every couple of years, or do they publish small, quick units? Is this something? I mean, if you're in a low environment now, it's not something that you can handle, but that next transition in your career, postdoc or early career, having those as questions you can ask.
So thank you everyone for answering questions. We'll take the time to answer another question for those whose questions we're not able to get to. We will follow up. I did have a couple specific things I wanted to address. One was regarding our MDF grants, the early career in particular. That is for those transitioning from your perhaps a late postdoctoral position into an independent position. So it's really geared towards those who are transitioning into an independent position. The other thing is we had some questions regarding when where are resources available. So after this talk, we will make the slides available. It will be sent to your email that you've signed up for this talk for. In addition, on the MDF site as well, we do have resources available for applying for our grants, particularly what we're looking for in those applications. We have, in addition to our RFAs, tips and best practices for both the applications and in particular for the budget sections. So with that, we will go ahead and answer just one more question I think that has really come up for a bit of people is, how do you address some of the more challenging issues, particularly around, either potential former supervisors or other personal things that may have come up. And so I know, John, that you had mentioned a little bit about this, but maybe you can elaborate on these questions.
Yeah, I think you want to be direct and address it. You don't want to get into like a back and forth or a very negative, like, oh, my former supervisor sucked, it was horrible. You want to be diplomatic and just focus on what you can and can't provide. Like, I can't provide this because of this reason. It's also often good to get somebody who's peripheral to the situation and knows what happened, to, like, a committee member, a chair of department, to write a letter, that they can also back you up, because you don't want to be sort of your word against theirs. You want a little bit of context to that. I don't know if Andy B or Andy R has additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's not something you will discover when you write a grant, right? This is a fact you can manage, you can prepare, and you can develop strategies to navigate this situation in a very, very, very beautiful way, right? And so you just have to copy and paste when the times for the grant submission comes. So be proactive, talk to people, don't text, talk. And identify a mentoring team or group that will guide you through these questions.
Yeah, and I think you can turn it into not a positive, but I think you can talk about it as a challenge that you've overcome, and that you're staying in the field, and you can have a department chair or someone, sort of confirm that you overcame those challenges. I think there's always challenges in science, and finding ways to talk about those challenges and overcoming those challenges is really important. And I think the one thing I just want to maybe end with is, and Andy's been hitting this, is a communication. I think it's really important to communicate strategy. Like, you want your advisor or your mentors to know what your long-term plan is, especially like, say, with an early career award. Occasionally when I'm reviewing those early career awards from our great applicants, I'm wondering, well, what's the plan in 2 years? Or what's the plan, maybe they're still a senior postdoc and there's a plan to transition, but I really want to see the plan. And what it may be you're hoping this is all going to work, but I want to hear the plan. And then I want to hear the plan from your mentor advisor. So you want to have those conversations so that plan is all in place. And sometimes those are hard conversations, but it's better to have them before you put in that proposal. So just to mention, someone asked about sort of the funding, and, if you're a co-PI or you have joint funding with your advisor, that's going to be potentially complicated. So you really want to think that through and have a discussion, have a plan, so that there aren't any hurt feelings on either side, and you guys just have it all worked out.
You definitely don't want to have your personal statement saying, I want to go into industry, and your letter of support saying, this person's going to be a great academic faculty member. Like, you want everything on the same page with as much detail as you can provide, clearly stated.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Andy and Andy, for your support, and especially thank you, John, for leading such a great talk with such useful information for our young investigators.
Sorry for going over time.
We appreciate all that great information. As I mentioned previously, we will send out everything via email. If you have any questions for us, please reach out at grants@myotonic.org. And we thank you all for attending this talk, and we're looking forward to seeing you all in Indianapolis.
So maybe one more thing, Nadine. If this was helpful to you, or you want more of these Q&A questions, again, send it to Nadine, send it to the email, and then we can think about whether we should have we can accommodate time for more of these QA periods. Thank you.
Thank you all.